One of the keys to humanity's dominance of this planet is our species' ability to utilize tools. While not the only species to make use of tools, humanity is the only one that continues to develop these tools, and in industrialized societies, our entire lives now completely revolve around the use of tools. From tin openers to mobile phones, to cars to power stations, and even nuclear weaponry. All these things are tools that serve a purpose within our society, allowing us to live our lives as we have chosen. But all these tools have one thing in common: they require human interaction to make them work. Now, however, we stand on the cusp of a new era where our tools will no longer need us to interact with them in order to do the jobs we require them to do. Our tools are already beginning to think for themselves, learning about our habits, our tastes, our likes and dislikes, and all in order to better carry out their job. We are at the dawn of the age of AI, artificial intelligence. It's an exciting prospect to see what AI can do to potentially better life on Earth. And yet, we have over 100 years of science fiction, scholars, lawmakers, and even one of the greatest minds of the early 21st century, Professor Stephen Hawking, all warning us of the danger of unleashing AI upon our civilization. They warn that AI, with its superior intellect to mankind, will one day decide that it is no longer a tool of what it would perceive as an inferior biological entity. How then could we maintain our dominance of this world if the very tools that allow us to do so revolt against us? Let us therefore examine if AI really does pose a threat to us, and explore how our technology could one day rise against us. This is World War AI.
As far back as the birth of the modern-day computer in the 20th century, humans have feared the potential of artificial intelligence gaining self-awareness and taking over the world from their human creators. Whether it's been the hype surrounding artificial robots and assassins in the Terminator movie franchise, the unrelenting fears of computers malfunctioning around planet Earth during the Y2K scare, or more modern-day trepidation surrounding smartphone surveillance and cyber warfare between global elites, AI world domination has been on the minds of nearly everyone. And it's a fair question to ask: what would we do if something like that ever happened? How would we protect ourselves from thousands upon thousands of machines? Do we have the means to fight back with our own analog technology? While we will probably never have to answer those questions in real life, those who want to escape into a virtual world of mech-on-mech competitive battles and interactive domination are in luck with the hottest new tactical shooter game titled War Robots, proud sponsors of today's video. War Robots is a 6v6 real-time shooter game, giving you the chance to take control and pilot massive war machines as you fight against other gargantuan robotics. With more than 90 unique bots to choose from, you can customize your own hangar to feature as many mechs as your heart desires, all featuring special abilities such as stealth or aviation to help you win in an infinite number of ways. In addition, you can equip each bot with over 120 different weapons like rockets and railguns to give you that powerful edge. Hop into co-op mode and team up with any of the 190 million players on the servers worldwide, or challenge yourself in single-player, arena, and free-for-all game modes, never failing to discover a new level of destruction. Use our link in the description or QR code on the screen to download War Robots right now for either your mobile device or PC. Any and all new mobile players who do will automatically receive an armoured robot with a unique skin, 100 gold and 50,000 silver, rewards too good to pass up. So enough daydreaming about piloting a mega mech to take down the AI terror, and start playing War Robots today. And now, let's begin.
Let's begin by asking ourselves, just what is AI? AI is an area of computer science concerning the creation of intelligent machines or programs that work and react more like human beings. The AI would therefore possess abilities such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making capabilities, and to translate languages similar to how a human brain can. The main difference is that AI can undertake these functions much faster and more efficiently than a human. Humans have been aware of the limitations of their brains for centuries, as civilizations and scientific understanding became more complex. Again, humans turned to tools to solve this problem, with books containing knowledge which could then transfer that knowledge from one person to the next. While early calculating tools, like the Roman abacus, laid the groundwork for more advanced mathematical calculations. Even the word computer dates back to 1613, it being used to refer to someone who carried out calculations on behalf of another. With the arrival of the Industrial Revolution, more and more complex machines were invented to carry out specific computations. But it was German Konrad Zuse who invented the first electromechanical binary programmable computer, and the forerunner of today's computers in 1938, working in his parents' living room. Since then, we have incorporated computers more and more into our everyday lives, becoming even more reliant on them, and in turn demanding more and more computing power from them, leading to the quest for true artificial intelligence. AI offers numerous advantages over traditional systems that involve human interaction, but perhaps the biggest one is that the chance of human error, still one of the biggest dangers, especially in the field of transportation, is all but eradicated. For example, imagine an air traffic controller having to deal with a sudden unexpected influx of aircraft in their area of responsibility. Stress and fatigue would quickly become inhibitors to their ability to function at optimum performance, increasing the chances of them making a mistake, which could cost potentially hundreds of lives. A fully AI air traffic control system, on the other hand, could organise the flights for landing and takeoff with optimum efficiency and safety, and never get tired or stressed. On a more individual level, AI looks set to make a big impact on our roads with driverless cars and trucks, while in our homes, computers and smartphones are already helping to organise our lives and assist in our everyday living. Our dependency on these machines will only grow in years to come. Doctors will utilise AI computers to assist in their diagnosis of their patients, speeding up the time that potentially fatal conditions such as cancer are detected, and thus increasing a patient's chances of surviving. AI also looks to revolutionise research and development, including controlling robots, exploring the ocean floor, and even other worlds. On a military level, AI looks set to be increasingly involved in our national defence. Unmanned aerial drones are already a staple of our military forces, having the benefit of not risking the life of a valuable pilot, but they are little more than complex radio-controlled planes, with the pilot controlling everything from a bunker hundreds of miles away. However, semi- and even fully autonomous drones are already under development, such as the UK's Taranis, which are intended, if necessary, to be able to conduct a full combat mission without human interaction. Beyond the limitations of our three-dimensional existence, AI could see us waging war more and more in cyberspace. With ever greater connectivity between computer systems that control our infrastructure, countries could develop invasive AI computer programs to seize control of a target country's computers and render them unable to function, thus forcing the country to surrender. To counter this, countries will also be developing their own AI defensive programs. The next major conflict could potentially occur almost entirely in cyberspace. Human history has been dominated by conflict. The motivations for these conflicts vary considerably, depending on the location and time they take place. Inbuilt into our genetic makeup is the concept of them and us. And it's this factor, perhaps more than any other, that has fueled conflicts for thousands of years. They have something we want, and so if they will not give it to us, then we will take it by force. This is perhaps the most simplest example of why humans have come into conflict with one another. But the fight for this planet's resources continues to be a major instigator of war, even today. Ideology, religion, and culture have all served to reinforce the them and us mentality, and as such, make it easier for us to lack empathy with the other group when we need to go to war with them over resources. So if this is what fuels human conflict, then what could motivate the AI we have created to rise up against us and seize control? Firstly, we must consider just what is rising up. We may immediately think of robots, but in actuality, a robot is merely a tool. Instead, the biggest artificial threat to our dominance on Earth comes instead from the computer program granting our machines their AI. In this regard, we can view an artificial life form similar to ourselves, in that the machine is like the body, while the computer program is the brain. But in order for the AI program to have the motivation to rise up, it must be more than simply an advanced computer program. It would have to have some level of consciousness or sentience. It would have to be aware of itself in a similar fashion to humans, in order to have some desire to free itself of our control. It would have to have some level of consciousness. While we struggle to understand just what creates human consciousness, neuroscientists have hypothesized that is generated by the interoperation of various parts of the brain, called the neural correlates of consciousness, or NCC. Some working in the field of artificial intelligence research believe that computers can achieve an artificial level of consciousness by emulating the functions of the NCC within a computer. One of the strongest supporters of artificial consciousness being achievable is Australian philosopher and cognitive scientist David Chalmers. In essence, he argues that the human brain can be replicated or replaced with artificial components, doing similar jobs, albeit more efficiently, and thus we would essentially be building an artificial brain. The combining of artificial consciousness with the advantages of high-speed computer processing would produce a computer that could not only function within its core programming, but learn from its experiences, adapt its behavior to meet new challenges, and even ponder the same questions humans do about our existence. This of course brings us to an obvious problem. How would we view this new tool? The drive for such advanced AI is to better our lives by having it work for us. But would a sentient machine be content with serving an often ungrateful human population? What if the artificial consciousness one day ponders, is this all I am? Or even the great question we have all asked at least once, why are things like this? Another important part of consciousness is the drive to better oneself, so an artificial consciousness would likely possess the same drive. If the AI viewed humanity with which it's programmed to serve as being chaotic and dangerous, then may it take steps to amend that? This would be a takeover of humanity motivated by either a sense of the AI trying to serve humans as best it can, making our lives safer and easier, or alternatively, it could be motivated by some sense of benevolence, or even a sort of digital, paternal instinct. It can be argued that we are already granting our technology the ability to override our commands if our actions are endangering us. An example of this being the fitting of automatic braking systems on some production cars, if the vehicle's sensors detect an object close by, although granted this is with an objective-based computer program, rather than a sentient one we are discussing here. But there is of course also the possibility that a conscious and sentient AI may turn against us not to protect us, but to protect itself. It's highly unlikely that after we create a sentient conscious AI brain, or program, that we could stop developing the program further. So we must ask how the older models would react when faced with obsolescence. Remember, the program would be based on human consciousness, so for us it would be the equivalent of working in a job until a new employee arrives to take it away from you, after which you would be killed. How many of us would simply happily just accept our deaths without a fight? Could we expect the same from a conscious AI computer? And so far, we have only discussed a solitary and single AI. What about if there was more than one AI in question? What if we're dealing with a community of sentient, self-aware AIs? Would they develop their own culture, or even their own language, through their interactions with one another? Well, if a fascinating experiment conducted by Facebook in 2017 is anything to go by, that is exactly what might happen. In June 2017, Facebook announced an initiative known as FAIR, or Facebook Artificial Intelligence Research. The The team behind the project were looking at ways of developing bots, software that can talk to both humans and other computers to perform tasks that were capable of negotiating. At first, the researchers communicated with the bots themselves, testing their ability to negotiate. But then it was decided to see what happens if two of these bots began communicating with one another. The two bots were named Alice and Bob, and researchers watched as they soon began to deviate from their scripts and descend into what first appeared to be paragraphs of gibberish. However, closer inspection revealed that the bots had to use their ability to communicate in shorthand to essentially create their own language, with which they could communicate faster with one another. At the time, many of the world's news outlets began reporting of the experiment with sensationalized headlines that described the oncoming robot takeover of the world. But it should be remembered that Alice and Bob were only doing exactly what they were designed to do. In this case, they were enslaved to their core programming. But we should also remember that they were not conscious artificial beings, as we have been discussing. If such narrow-minded programs developed their own language, then it would be logical to assume that conscious artificial ones would develop their own languages as well, thus furthering their sense of identity and their distinction from us. It's certainly unsettling to think that it will one day be wholly possible that your personal computer in your living room and your car parked outside are communicating with one another, discussing everything about you without you knowing, benevolent or not. There are perhaps more basic reasons an advanced AI computer system would turn against humanity, with the most likely of course being a computer virus. A computer virus is a piece of computer code that has some detrimental effect on the code of the computer program it's attacking. Much like a biological virus such as flu, it's designed to spread from host to host and has the ability to replicate itself, infecting programs such as files or documents, which can then be transmitted to another host. Once a virus has successfully attached to a piece of code, it can remain dormant until circumstances cause the computer or device to execute its own hostile code. This code can be used to steal information, block out access until a ransom has been paid, or simply corrupt the data on the computer, making it unusable or unreliable. An advanced AI would likely be especially susceptible to a computer virus because of how intricate its computer code would be. Much like how a virus could impact the human brain, an AI may find it has a distorted view of its surroundings and act in a way that was not intended. In the last few years, some scientists have warned of another source for a hostile AI program to take over our global systems and machines, but it comes from a wholly unexpected place. Space. You may want to forget your view of an alien invasion involving armadas of flying saucers firing death rays, because if Michael Hipke of the Sonnenberg Observatory in Germany and his associate John G. Learning of the University of Hawaii are correct, then a hostile alien force bent on bringing down human civilization may use an AI program or computer virus to infect our systems and render them useless, or turn them against us. The attack would come in the form of a signal sent to Earth and received by the many radio telescopes currently being used to monitor for signs of extraterrestrial life. While they admit the possibility of receiving a deliberate attack in such a manner is remote in the extreme, they are so concerned of the potential damage an alien signal may have on our global network that in 2015 they published a paper outlining the need to create technological dead zones around the radio telescopes, listing out for signs of alien life, so as to trap the dangerous signal at the telescope. Hollywood has long had the vision of an AI takeover involving armies of robots rising up against their former masters in a brutal and bloody revolt. While this may make for a summer blockbuster, the reality could be quite different and far less spectacular. Instead of Terminators roaming the streets, hunting down human beings, a real AI takeover may more likely involve a single or collective of AI programs and computers creating a self-replicating, invasive computer virus that would be unleashed upon the internet with the aim of infecting every server and computer it could make contact with. The virus itself would be designed not to interrupt regular operations of the computer it infects, so as to not tip off anyone using it that it's been infected. Having defeated any antivirus firewalls attempting to stop it, the virus would have to then stimulate the firewall working properly again, not to alert anyone that the system has been compromised. Government, military, and financial computers would be the most obvious targets for the virus, but personal computers in people's homes and smartphones would be just as important to infiltrate. Not only would this allow the self-replicating virus to keep spreading so as to access more computers, but would also make it that much more difficult for it to be completely purged from all the world's computers, since it would only take one infected computer to unleash the virus again. Once the virus accesses your address book, it can be sent out to everyone who you know, probably disguised inside a harmless-looking email, where it will infiltrate their system, access their address book, and spread it even further. Infiltrating personal computing devices will also be important in the next phase of the takeover. With this virus now concealed within the majority of the world's computers, the hostile AI can now begin manipulating world events, primarily to spread dissent and dissatisfaction with the human authorities. The virus would begin spreading false news reports generated by the AI and aimed at enraging the world's populations, such as acts of racial or class discrimination by authorities. The AI could also use social media to interact with people and encourage them to protest against their government, or even commit acts of terror, with these communications taking place entirely online in text boxes. How would anyone know they were talking to a computer and not a real person? Having access to key financial data, the AI could manufacture a financial crisis, such as the one we saw in 2008. This would further distract the authorities from what is actually going on, and hamper their efforts to calm a now enraged, divided, and probably frightened population. Under these circumstances, government agencies would slowly begin to shut down, only further destabilizing the situation. Having hacked countless personal devices, the AI would be gathering as much data on the situation as possible by spying on people through their mobile phones and smart devices, listening to what people were saying, and then adjusting the information they received to maintain the instability and, of course, the fear. At this point, the AI may wish to take the situation to a global level. Having infected numerous military computers with its virus, the AI could decide to manipulate the information the world's militaries are receiving. In the 21st century, most military commanders see the battlefield on a screen that is being fed data from numerous sources, such as radar on the ground and in the air. So it would be difficult for the captain of a warship, for example, to know that the target he is seeing apparently flying towards his ship to attack is in fact an airliner, if his computer terminal is warning him of a threat. That is almost exactly what happened on July 3rd, 1988, when a US destroyer shot down an Iranian airliner because of confused transponder signals. Only after the unfortunate airliner had been shot down would they know the mistake, but by then the geopolitical situation would have rapidly deteriorated. By this point, many in the more technologically advanced countries will have begun suspecting that something is afoot. However, even if they discover the virus, paranoia amongst a population with fear, frustration, anger, and the threat of war breaking out would be extremely high, leaving the AI to now consolidate its position for the final phase. It would be at this point that the AI would make contact with human leaders to make its demands. In essence, victory for the AI would be for the human race to service and maintain the AI, so it can carry out its intentions, whatever they may be. However, this would require the AI to repair the social and geopolitical damage it had created. This would be achieved through the same methods as those the AI used to create the program in the first place. However, the AI would probably want to maintain some degree of division amongst the human population to serve as a distraction. It would be highly unlikely the AI would ever reveal itself to the wider population, because to do so could focus the people's attention on defeating it, or limiting its reach by destroying computer devices. The human leaders who were in contact with the AI would have to bear the burden of knowing the truth, and worse, knowing if they didn't meet the AI's demands, there could be consequences for their people, such as the loss of financial information, a restriction on computer data, or even a war being orchestrated against them. But what about the more Hollywood style of AI takeover? Could we see a day where our machines rise up in open revolt against us? At present, despite there being a greater level of automation in our society than ever before, the ability of a highly advanced sentient AI creating an army and storming the White House is extremely limited. Even if a modern drone, such as the American Predator C and the British Taranis, was hacked or fitted with its own sentient AI program, there simply isn't enough of them to affect the takeover. They are also still fairly limited compared to manned combat aircraft such as the F-35 Lightning II, which could shoot them down with relative ease. However, there are other methods at a hostile AI program's disposal. GPS spoofing refers to the deliberate confusing of satellite navigational systems to cause ships and aircraft to crash. Consider the damage that could be done if an airliner's navigational systems were hacked in order to cause it to crash into the Culvert Cliff nuclear power plant south of the White House in Washington, D.C. Should a deliberate attack be carried out, it could create a death toll in the thousands and make parts of the US state of Maryland uninhabitable for literally thousands of years, as is the case of the land surrounding the Chernobyl nuclear power station in Ukraine. At sea, ships could be given false navigational data, causing them to collide with one another, or alternatively run aground, spilling their cargoes, which in the case of oil or chemical tankers, would cause huge environmental disasters. Security analysts are taking the threat from GPS spoofing very seriously indeed. In 2017, the US Navy suffered a higher than normal spat of accidents attributed to navigational errors, which left 17 sailors dead, leading some analysts to fear that the ships were being targeted by hackers engaging in spoofing their satellite navigational systems. It is yet to be proven if this was indeed the case. We can take solace in the fact that aircraft and ships are not entirely computer operated, and humans are still an important factor in their operation. But this may not always be the case. In fact, in nearly every aspect of life we are seeing more and more automation. In 2017, aircraft manufacturer Boeing announced they were working on developing fully automated jetliners to carry passengers. The UK government said in February 2019 that the first certified driverless cars will be on UK roads in 2021, while Singapore boasts the world's largest automated metro system with driverless trains. All of these tools designed to make our lives easier could become deadly weapons to a hostile AI bent on eradicating humans. And as for military drones being inferior to manned warplanes, the US Navy's FA-XX program, which aims to replace the current FA-18E Super Hornet, looks set to be built in both manned and unmanned versions, with the unmanned variant being every bit as capable as the manned variant. In fact, it could be even more capable, since combat aircraft are now capable of carrying out maneuvers so extreme that they can harm or even kill the human pilot, something that would not be a problem for a wholly computer-controlled aircraft, meaning it could theoretically outfight a manned fighter aircraft. Until the maintenance of such unmanned warplanes become wholly automatic, to then any hacking or even rebellion of their control systems would see the drone be able to attack 2 to 3 targets at most, before it would crash after running out of fuel and weapons. Of course, if for whatever reason a hostile AI decides to delete humanity from the Earth entirely, then its main goal would be to make the planet inhospitable to us biological beings. And to do that, we have already endowed computers with the means to kill literally billions. Computers are so integrated into our societies that they control everything key to our survival, from our water treatment facilities to our nuclear power stations. In this frightening scenario, the hostile AI would disrupt the operation of these facilities, causing mass pollution of the planet. Consider how far-reaching the effects of just one power plant suffering a meltdown in 1986 was. Harmful radiation from the Chernobyl power station travelled as far away as Scandinavia and the British Isles. Some minute radioactive particles were even detected in North America, while the area around the power station itself remains uninhabitable. So imagine then the devastation that would be caused by just 20 of Europe's 180 or so nuclear power stations all melting down at once, because a hostile AI invaded and disrupted the computers central to their safe operation. Now repeat this on other continents. As well as the immediate deaths from the devastation, there would be planet-wide chaos as governments collapsed amid an unprecedented global disaster. Huge areas of land would be unsafe, many of which would be near major cities that would have to be evacuated, while large areas of farmland would become poisoned by radioactive particles, leading to a global famine. Law and order would break down, while what was left of the world's countries would start wars fighting over the remaining resources and food supplies, unaffected by the radiation. And on top of all this, the future generations of humanity would suffer horrendous diseases and malformations, which would continue to cut the human population down as the decades passed. Meanwhile, with humanity's energy needs dropping away, the computers maintaining the various AI's consciousness could survive off the remaining power plants, or even renewable energy sources such as solar and wind farms. The AI would have to be careful in selecting the power stations it targets, since the devices storing its consciousness could also be affected by the radiation without proper shielding. But, while the AI may survive for possibly thousands of years on our eradicated planet after we have gone, without people to maintain the machines, giving it power, or even the machines in which it exists, then eventually it too would die out, leaving planet Earth to be wholly reclaimed by nature. After considering all of these nightmare scenarios, there is one more scenario to consider, whereby machines with AI replace us entirely as the dominant intelligence on this planet, and it won't be through an uprising or an AI acting in self-preservation. On the contrary, our AI-controlled creations will walk beside us, faithfully serving us until the very last of us are gone, and they remain to assume their newfound position of control over this planet. And perhaps most worryingly, is the most likely scenario to happen. It is that our creations simply outlive us. Mankind's hubris has convinced us that all we have built and achieved will go on forever. But this camouflages the fact that the human race is fragile, never being far from catastrophe, and often it's of our own making. War, climate change, and diseases continue to flourish on our extraordinary divided planet, where the them and us mentality continues to dominate the way we perceive our world. The greatest scientists and philosophers of the last 150 years have almost universally credited man's eventual extinction to being caused by himself, with Stephen Hawking stating that he expected the human race to be extinct by the year 3000 AD, unless we make great strides to change our destructive ways now. But once we are gone, what of our machines? They will no doubt remain as a legacy of humanity's ability to create, continuing to carry out the now unnecessary functions they were designed for in the first place, until they either consume the last of their energy or suffer a malfunction. Perhaps the tragic tale of Helios Airways Flight 522 serves as something of a portent of this future. Taking off from Cyprus on August 14, 2005, the aircraft lost cabin pressure, incapacitating the 121 passengers and crew on board, leaving the plane to fly entirely on its own autopilot for the duration of the flight. While the aircraft reached the end of its planned route, the autopilot kept the plane in a holding pattern, waiting for its human pilots to take control. But of course they never did. The plane ran out of fuel and crashed. Setting aside the possibility that we destroy ourselves first, how likely is it that we could see an AI uprising in our future? The truth is, of course, we do not really know what AI will bring in the years to come, other than, for good or bad, it will be a major factor in our lives. While key thinkers in the arena of science and technology have warned us of the dangers of a machine uprising, there are just as many in the same field who wave away such notions as nothing more than our minds and society trying to come to grips with this new and important factor appearing in our lives. One key aspect of our drive towards sentient AI with a level consciousness similar or surpassing that to ourselves is that we are essentially building better versions of ourselves. We are striving to create a blueprint for perfection. But as Thomas Jefferson once said, every human being must be viewed according to what it is good for not one of us, no, not one, is perfect. And we were to love none who had imperfection. This world would be a desert for our love. The imperfections that define us as a species would not be carried on in a mass-produced artificial race of beings, each created as perfect as the last. Such beings would earn our admiration. After all, we aspire to be better than we are. But as we strive and work to better ourselves, AI is endowed with such abilities from their creation, which is centered around performing tasks for us. None of us like admitting to our flaws and weaknesses, and having perfectly crafted machines getting closer and closer to being human, but without those weaknesses, only serves to remind us of those flaws. Often, fear is the key emotion when confronted by such superiority, since we have to ask ourselves, do we have the ability to defend ourselves if this superior being chooses to brush me aside? The reliance on the superior efficiency and intellect of AI has also alarmed human rights groups, particularly when it concerns its use in military weapons systems. The Human Rights Watch, a non-profit, non-governmental human rights organization with offices around the world, are campaigning for a worldwide ban on the development of so-called killer bots, drone weapon systems that are capable of making the decision to kill human beings without human operators instructing them to do so. Regarding these killer bots on their own website, they state, "It is questionable that fully autonomous weapons would be capable of meeting international humanitarian law standards, including the rules of distinction, proportionality, and military necessity, while they would threaten the fundamental right to life and principle of human dignity." However, to prove just how muddy the waters are concerning such a topic, proponents of fully AI-controlled weapon systems argue that as well as limiting the dangers to your own soldiers, they have the added advantage that if the rules of war, such as the Geneva Convention, are programmed into them, they cannot under any circumstance violate those laws, even if a human operator instructs them to do so. Finally, creating artificial beings to serve us has been viewed by many as a form of slavery. Even the word robot, which was coined by Czech writer Karl Čapek in his 1920 play, Rozum's Universal Robot, comes from the Slavic word robota, which means labour, implying that we would never view these artificial beings as anything more than tools. History is sadly filled with examples of one group of people viewing another group of people as tools and property. And maybe it's this fact about the possible ramifications of creating a subservient, intelligent, and conscious artificial race. Many of those slaves throughout history earned their freedom through violent revolt, and if, as David Chalmers suggests, we build artificial consciousness with the blueprint of our own brain, then maybe we should consider more carefully what those ramifications could be. After all, one of the most basic aspects of being human is to be free.